Okay, we're continuing here in How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, chapter 9. We're on slide number 20. The role of the law in Israel in the Bible, okay? So even as we've talked about the many benefits of the Old Testament law, we also need to understand that this is why a new covenant accompanied by the gift of the Spirit needed to take place, so that God's people could actually internalize the law and begin to live it out, okay? And so the law was not thought of in Israel as a means of salvation. It was neither given for that reason, nor could it possibly function in that way. It functioned as a way of setting out the parameters of relationships and establishing loyalty between God and his people. Again, think discipling nations. That's what the Old Testament law was trying to do, okay, on the horizontal axis in a myriad number of ways, but also, ultimately in the vertical axis between God's people and Yahweh, okay? So the law presents examples or samples of what it means to be loyal to God. So if you go to slide number 21, talking about the two different kinds of law, apodictic law and causatic law, you can see examples of that. In fact, they give the example of Leviticus 19, verses 9 through 14. Okay, that's an example of apodictic law. I'm going to quickly get there by courtesy of my phone and see if I can't read it to you. Okay, here's an example, or I'll just read parts of it. Beginning verse 9 of Leviticus 19. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not deceive one another. Do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of the Lord or your God. I am the Lord. Do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight, and on and on and on it goes, okay? Notice the often repeated phrase, I am the Lord, okay? Trying to show how clearly Yahweh's character is tied to these laws. In other words, this is how God is, and these laws are an outflow or an outward expression of God's character. Okay, the Israelites as God's people were to worship and thus be like God. The commandments were binding on all Israelites at all times, okay? Commandments like these begin with do or do not. They're called apodictic laws, okay? Do or do nots are that, okay? You go to slide number 22. Direct commands, usually in the second person imperative, generally applicable, and they tell the Israelites the sorts of things they're supposed to do to fulfill their part of the covenant with God. Such laws are not exhausting, okay? Harvesting welfare laws provide transferable principles to sheep and fig olives. They're under obligation to share your abundance with the poor and the resident foreigner, okay? They're not totally exhaustive. What they are is what they call paradigmatic. Okay, it sets a standard by an example rather than exhaustively mentioning every single thing. Okay, they're trying to show examples paradigmatically rather than exhaustively. The statements of the law were intended as a reliable guide with general applicability, not a technical description of all conditions that we could imagine. Okay, this is a great example of, if you go to slide number 23, the legal code in the United States, okay? The U.S. Constitution is paradigmatic. It's not exhaustive, okay? The founders did not want to micromanage at the federal level everything that every American did, okay? They technically punted it back down to the states and local communities to develop their own legal codes. They wanted the U.S. Constitution, again, which dealt with federal or what we call national law, to be general in its scope, okay? In other words, you can't write laws so comprehensively that, it basically covers everything that humans do. First of all, you wouldn't want a government that did that, okay? What does a government that did that look like? Well, George Orwell's 1984. Big Brother is watching you, right? One nation under surveillance, with liberty and justice for all. Is America moving in that direction right now? Yeah. Is that something to be concerned about? Yeah. Is that something you need to be praying about? Yeah. You know, when they're talking about monitoring your movements by your cell phone and where you go to see if you are basically bringing COVID-19 to various areas and you're not staying at home, that's a great example of Big Brother is watching you. That's example of the surveillance state that we're at. And that can be that should be troubling, okay? I'm trying to show you that the founders didn't want to get into all that. In fact, to me, I'm digressing here, that there's all kinds of constitutional problems, violations of the Fourth Amendment, right? Illegal searches and seizures, surveilling everything you do. Okay, I don't even want to get into what the NSA is doing and things like that, but that's a whole nother deal. Okay, take my American National Government class and we'll talk about that at length. Okay, so the Old Testament law is much closer to the United States Constitution, setting out in broad sweep and outline the characteristics of justice and freedom in the land than it is to federal and state codes. Federal and state codes do get to every single thing, okay? Or at least they try to. The Old Testament, though limited in wording, the Old Testament law, these apodictic laws are actually very comprehensive in spirit, okay? So go to slide number 24. A preliminary hermeneutical observation. Although not its primary intent, the law shows us how impossible it is to please God on our own. When we read the Old Testament law, we ought to be humbled to appreciate how unworthy we are to belong to God. We ought to be moved to praise and thanksgiving that He provided for us a way to be accepted in His sight without humanly fulfilling the Old Testament law. Okay, let me say it another way. After reading Leviticus, you should be like, thank you, Jesus, for what you've done for us. Because how would you like to follow every jot and tittle of every aspect of that ritual law? Okay, it's for me, it's almost mind-numbing to think to have to do that. And when Jesus said, it is finished, He covered it. And so if you freely receive what He's done for you and enter into His kingdom, I tell you what, it's a glorious place to be. And it far superseded the Old Testament law, okay? So slide number 25, let's shift gears, casuistic law, okay? Whereas apodictic law is do's and do nots, casuistic law is case-by-case law, okay? Deuteronomy 15, verses 12 through 17. Let your servants go free, but if they want to stay with you, take an awl through the earlobe, okay? Elements in this law are conditional. They describe certain conditions that prevail in certain types of situations involving certain types of people. But they're not necessarily in every situation involving every person. Casuistic laws usually involve third-person descriptions, give examples of what may be the case or what may happen and what may ought to be done if it does. In contrast to apodictic law, which prescribe what must always be done by everyone in every situation, casuistic laws single out particular cases that apply only to some people in some situations, not to everyone in every situation. Okay, do you kind of see that distinction? Casuistic law, okay, going on to slide number 26. The casuistic law in Deuteronomy 15, 12 through 17 applies only in cases that you, an Israelite, have at least one servant. You, an Israelite, have a servant who does or does not wish to remain as your servant voluntarily after the mandatory minimum term of service is passed. If you're not an Israelite or you don't have servants, the law doesn't apply to you. If you are a servant, this applies indirectly to you in that it protects your rights. It is a conditional law, a possible condition that may or may not apply to a given person at a particular time. Such a casuistic or case-by-case law constitutes a large portion of the 600 plus commandments found in the Old Testament Pentateuchal law. Interestingly, none of them is specifically renewed in the New Covenant. Because such laws apply specifically to Israel's civil, religious, and ethical life, they are by their very nature limited in their applicability and therefore unlikely to apply to the Christian. Okay, so I'm going to end there and we'll begin with slide number 27.